All right, and it looks like we are live on Grown and Flown, and so welcome to Thursday Night Live. My name is Brennan Barnard. I'm the Director of College Counseling and Outreach at the Derryfield School in New Hampshire, and the College Admission Program Advisor at Making Caring Common at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And we are fortunate to have some wonderful admission leaders with us here tonight. And I will introduce them in 1 second, but just wanted to let folks know that this is being recorded, and we will send out the recording to those who registered afterwards. And it is being streamed live on Grown and Flown, and really thank them for their collaboration with this. And if you haven't gotten it already, their book is now out on paperback, so you can rush right out after this and log on to Amazon and order that. But we're really fortunate to have their support with this. And as we go along, we're going to ask folks to post questions in the chat and in the comment section, to comment on Facebook, and we'll answer questions as they come. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists tonight. First, we have Jonathan Burdick, who became the Vice Provost for Enrollment at Cornell University in 2019. He has a 34-year career as an enrollment leader at the University of Southern California and University of Rochester before arriving at Cornell. And his principal areas of focus have been expanding opportunities for all students, achieving transformations in international enrollment, and leading innovation. Next we have Erica Johnson, and Erica is the Vice President for Enrollment Management at Westminster College in Utah. She joined the Westminster community in the summer of 2019. Previously, Erica served as the Associate Vice President of Enrollment and Director of Admissions at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. Welcome. And finally, we have Anthony A.J. Jones is the Associate Provost and Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management at Howard University in Washington, D.C. He has functioned as the Vice President of Enrollment Management at both Fisk University and DePaul University. So welcome all. Thanks for being here with us tonight. And I've asked the panelists just to take a moment and introduce us to their school, and then start off by answering the one question, which is, what is one truth about college admission? So Jonathan, do you want to start, and we'll just we'll work on around?
Sure, and thank you. It's nice to see everybody here. Cornell University is a comprehensive doctoral granting university in Ithaca, New York, a beautiful town about 4 hours drive from New York City. We have 8 undergraduate colleges and schools, 6 graduate schools and programs, and 80 different fields for PhD programs. Research is a heavy and important part of what we do, and I've enjoyed being here for a year. It's a lovely place. I think I urge you all to come. And then, I'm sorry, one thing I would change about admissions, or one thing I would keep?
One truth. What is one truth about college admission? There's so many myths and so many misconceptions about college admission, and just love to hear one thing that is enduring.
I'll say, this is maybe sound a little trite, but it matters to me. Ultimately, college admission is only good when it's one at a time, when every single decision reflects a good decision about that specific student at that specific moment.
That's great. And vice versa as well, from students to when they're choosing colleges. Great, thank you. Erica?
Good evening. So I work at Westminster College, which is a small comprehensive university in Salt Lake City. We have about 1,700 undergraduate students whose education is deeply rooted in the liberal arts traditions, but we also offer some professional school programs in nursing, education, and business. Westminster tends to attract students who want that liberal arts small college experience, but are also excited by the opportunities outside of the classroom, right? Within a 30-minute drive, we have 6 world-class ski resorts and just about endless outdoor opportunity, and then a great and growing city that surrounds our campus. So the location is a big part of what attracts students to the classroom experience and the opportunities outside of the classroom. When I think about a truth as it relates to college admissions, even with all the pressure and the stress that the process may bring on at certain points, I think there's value in this, right? And taking time to really be reflective and think about the kind of community that students want to be part of, how they learn best, where they'd like to wake up for the next 4 years. And so I think, you know, there's value to spending time in being reflective. And this is perhaps for a lot of students the first time where they've really asked themselves those kinds of big questions.
That's great, thank you. AJ.
Thanks a lot, Brennan. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I am AJ Jones, and representing Howard University, one of the nation's oldest HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. We were founded in 1867 here in Washington, D.C. We have about 11,000 students on campus that study in 130 programs across 13 colleges and universities. We are heavy in research. We have also an splendid teaching reputation in our undergraduate college. We were ranked very high on the U.S. News and World Report's list for teaching. It really is an environment that is really the Howard family. We are very proud of the exceptional students that we gain from over 49 states across the country, over 20 countries from around the world. And they come in and they really form a very diverse community of young scholars. And so when we graduate a Howard graduate, we believe that that is graduating a social engineer, someone who's going to go out and truly make impact on the world. And our alumni have certainly proved that they are able to do that. As I think about a truth about college admissions, I think it's the most transparent process that one can experience. You are revealing things about yourself that perhaps in it are deep truths, thoughts, opinions, ideas, to scope a profile that a complete stranger will be able to see. And so that's a very transparent process. And it's one that, as an admissions professional, and I think I speak for my colleagues, one that we tend to really respect and reverence in terms of what students are sharing with us. Thanks.
Yeah, somebody well, we did this series last spring. Ryan Hargraves from University of Vermont was on, and he referred to it as kind of students building their mission statement, right? The application as kind of a mission statement, and whether it's kind of your mission statement or your elevator pitch or whatever it is, just kind of putting that out there. So I really appreciate that perspective. Okay, so now this is the audience participation part of the show here. For those who are attending, we asked a bunch of you beforehand kind of questions you had. If you had to guess, what are the two most commonly asked questions leading up to this? You can just put it in the chat there. The two most common questions. We're gonna address them right at the beginning here. So what would you guess they are? There we go. Yep, they're COVID related. Yep, optional. Okay, so as people are weighing in, that's one of them, the testing. So I'm gonna ask. So the question that was the most asked was, does test optional really mean test optional? You know, I think it came out today that what 2/3 of all schools in the country are now test optional, and so would love to hear. I don't know, Jonathan, do you want to take this one to begin with? You know,
sure.
Does test really mean test optional?
Sure, and I'm one of more than 300, I want to say, deans and directors of admission across the country who've signed a document through the Office of Making Caring Common that said, yes, test optional really is test optional. The way we thought about it at Cornell was to tell people explicitly, do not travel across a state line or get on a plane to take a test. Do not take a test in your area if prevalence is dangerous and there's no reason that anybody should be offering a test. So we're trying to make sure that people understand that they will have a fair shot at gaining admission to the universities that have called themselves test optional. On the back end at Cornell, and this has been important for me, we're gathering a community of what will ultimately be more than 200 people reading applications, touching applications. We're making sure we're walking through all the paces of what do you look at academically, what do you look at in terms of other parts of the application, how do you go about the process of reviewing an application without having a tool that you're used to having. And I'm feeling very good about the community's development along those lines and the plans they have going forward. We will also be sort of checking ourselves and being real and making sure that we don't have any tendency to over-favor students who do submit tests over those who don't. So this is all manageable, I think.
That's great. And you speak from experience because you...
Yeah, we were at Rochester, I got to take a 16-year process. We took 8 years to go test flexible and then 8 more years to go test optional, and then I up and left. So I assume Rochester had a really good experience this past year. They haven't come in to tar and feather me down the road. And I think I've been encouraged about what's going on this year in terms of people responding and being thoughtful about. At the very least, I hope we come out of this on the far side with a more nuanced understanding and use of tests rather than the one that's been most common in higher education for quite some time.
That's great. Erica, do you want to add anything just in terms of kind of without, I mean, some of the questions here in the chat, without testing, you know, what are you looking at and what's most important and how's that look?
Yeah, you know, even prior to test cancellations and students, you know, having to make decisions about testing over the course of the last 6 months or so, I think it's important to recognize that there were hundreds of institutions in the United States that have already adopted test optional policies. Jonathan just mentioned his experience at his prior institution. At mine, they'd been a test optional institution for decades. And so there's a lot of really great examples of institutions, big and small, that have been using test optional admissions in some cases for decades and really have learned a lot through those processes. At the heart of it, whether it's been test optional for 6 months or 6 years, right, is the fact that the transcript and a student's 4-year experience has always been the most heavily weighted in the institutions and the offices where I've worked, right? So really looking at a student's full school experience, knowing that there's always been highs and lows from one semester to the next, or students who've had different types of experiences across their 4 years of high school, and that's always mattered. And that's still at the heart of what we're doing, combining the transcript and the rest of the application to put the story together. There may be one less chapter in the story this year, but the book has never just been one chapter, right? And so we've been doing this for a long time, and a lot of us have pretty extensive experience in test optional admissions. It doesn't change the fact that we've always based our decisions around multiple parts to the story, and never just one chapter.
That's great, thanks. And so I'm looking at the chat and people hit it right on. The second biggest issue, and AJ, maybe I'll turn to you with this one, or maybe all of you, but this issue of deferrals. So there's this real kind of anxiety out there that that an increased number of students from last year's class of 2020, graduating from high school, will defer their admission, and therefore there will be kind of less spots or more, it will be more selective for this coming year. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think once you, if you're applying to schools who tend to be more selective, that means that those schools will often have a certain number of seats available to students. And it is somewhat contractual that they have agreed that that those students who are deferring would acquire some of those seats. So this has to be some forethought on the college generally to provide that. That said, though, it may not necessarily mean that those remaining seats that are there become more competitive in the sense that a school is looking to sort of increase its profile in terms of who else they would admit. Schools are going to work hard to ensure that students are still gaining a fair shot at whatever seats are remaining. I will tell you that for us at Howard, we had less than 0.4% of students who asked for deferrals. So that will be less of an issue for us than it might be for some other schools. But yet still, it's something that we'll have to really think about as we're going into the semester. I guess what I want to end by is just encouraging families and students not to think that you have to now do something even more extensive to stand out or to differentiate just because deferrals are now a part of that class that you're attempting to get into. Again, most selective schools are going to try to give students the best opportunity, as always, that they would have for admission.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Jonathan, John, Erica, any thoughts or observations on what you're seeing at your schools, numbers of deferrals and how that's impacting things?
Yeah, I think there's something real that has happened here with more students deferring for, I think, their own best reasons, and colleges being willing to grant them that in the way that AJ has described. But I think it's overstated in the media. If you talk to all of you, the high school counselors, you find that not that many more of your students are choosing gap years. It's a problem that doesn't affect a whole lot of people. A lot of people just need to get to college and then get through college and get a degree and start their job, and they just don't have this option. And so I think it's a thin sliver of people. And at Cornell, there's not going to be even a 2% impact on the number of students we offer to, and a negligible, maybe 0.2% impact on our total admit rate, other things equal. So it's not going to be a meaningful factor in the year ahead.
Erica?
Yeah, the other one thing that I would add is that while this may not apply for all institutions, many of us are part of not just managing first year size, but the overall size of the institution. And if our current first year classes are slightly smaller, right, than we've historically seen, there may be opportunity in some schools for next year's first year class to be slightly larger, right, in order to keep that overall enrollment balanced across the 4 years and to keep that school size from having big fluctuations from one year to the next. So I agree with Jonathan that the percentages are probably small, maybe even negligible at a lot of institutions. Some places may find themselves with some opportunity to admit a few more students next year if it means balancing out the overall size of the institution, right, and keeping a little consistency from one year to the next.
Yeah, and I've even heard some admission leaders predicting that, you know, they'll grow, that because enrollment management models are kind of off, schools might be likely to take more students because they're not sure of yield, then they might accept more students than they had in the past to try to make a class. So I think it really depends upon the schools, and it's not as big an issue as people make it out to be. Thank you all. So I'm going to turn this and encourage people to put questions in the chat. Would love to talk about essays, and should essays be any different this year, or are they going to play a bigger part in admission review because of either test optional or because of COVID? Any thoughts on that, AJ?
Yeah, the college admissions application, as I mentioned earlier, it's really that opportunity to, differentiate yourself from the rest of the pool. And if you think about what colleges produce, like a factory would produce widgets, if you will, colleges produce graduates. We produce people who go out and be functional citizens who contribute. And we also produce new knowledge through our research. So when admission professionals are looking at an application, one of the things that we're trying to assess is does this person have what it takes in order to make it to that day of graduation? Can they persist? Can they push through adversity? Can they pay attention to what's important? So having that reflected in the college application is key, and the essay is a huge part of that. One of the things I'm very elated about this year, we are in a Common App exclusive school, and so Common App, as many of you know, has allowed for an optional essay question that deals with the effect of COVID-19 and the pandemic on a student. And so I'm excited about us receiving responses from that, because I think that's one more opportunity that a young person can show how they have managed to really do what's necessary to get the stuff done that really needs to get done. So I do think the essay is going to be important. And I think that they're going to be, I'm excited about the new opportunities there are to kind of expand the profile that a student would have.
Absolutely. You're breaking up just a bit, AJ. Is he breaking up for you? Okay. I'm not sure, but we could hear most of what you were saying now. So, and very good points. I would love to, Erica or Jonathan, John, do you want to weigh in on that at all? Essays? No, what he said, right? Yeah. Okay. What about this idea of the COVID response on the place that students can talk about how it's impacted them on both the Coalition app and the Common app? There's I think a lot of questions as I've started to meet with students this week at my school, and as I hear from colleagues, students are kind of wondering, do I need to do that? Will it be looked at adversely if I don't fill out the kind of COVID impact statement? And what should I put in there? Should I put in there if I've lost opportunities to do activities or that kind of thing? Any thoughts on that? Erica?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say to a student that they have to submit that portion of the application, right? I also want students and families to feel assured that in admissions offices, we recognize that everyone has been impacted at some level. And we go into this year's review process having those kinds of conversations as part of our training and our preparation for reviewing files, right? Recognizing that transcripts and opportunities are just going to look different for most students for the end of their junior years. But beyond that, if a student has had particular challenges in accessing their education, in certain experiences that have been canceled that they wanted us to know about, they should absolutely use that space, just as they in the past might have used the additional information section to share anything that didn't fit in the boxes on the rest of the application. That can be helpful in rounding out the story, but I wouldn't say to a student that they have to sit down and craft an additional essay for that COVID question. I think it really should be seen as the space to help fill in the gaps if that information is not available in other places. My guess is a lot of their schools, their counselors are going to do a great job helping us understand what happened in those schools last year. So profiles and other parts of the application where we're going to get a feel for how individual schools were forced to change and react starting in March.
Yeah, and at the same time, hopefully schools will provide that context, but at the same time, it's really important for students to provide the context that their counselor might not know, right, at home, or maybe they spent last spring helping care for a younger sibling and that impacted their ability to do their own work, or they've been working a frontline job or something like that. And so I think it's really important for students to be intentional about that, right? And get that. Yeah, John?
I'm just going to demur a little bit and say, I don't know, for an alarming percentage of us, this has been a time where we were obligated to stay at home more than we wanted and not see our friends and not do things and play video games instead and sit around and watch Netflix. And all of that is horrible. But if that's the experience that people want to write about and they would in order to fill the terror of a blank space, they would put something about a sense of deprivation and loss that may struggle to be original. I hope students will feel free to not use it. I think it's brilliant and right to have offered it. I think it's going to be important as they take up space for some of this, just a cathartic going through the consequences of what we've all been experiencing together. And it may produce some really valuable insights in the way that Erica's described. But I hope students don't feel like they've got to do it. And by and large, I would be terrified if I thought most of them were going to use it to sort of whine about what happened at their school, which probably on instinct, on average, wasn't a lot worse than what happened at other schools and maybe not as bad. Just if you need to say it, but don't go on about your loss. People have all suffered. Your experience may be different and it may have an impact on what you're able to do, but there's probably a whole bunch else about you and the other 150 years of your long life that's going to be more important to try to grasp at this point, and I want you to focus mostly on that.
Great point. Kind of the same approach as the, now there's a family responsibilities section on the activities that you can fill out. And, family responsibilities is not taking out the trash, right? Like you're not filling that out for that ideally. These are really for significant contributions or significant impacts that things have had on people. Can we dive into early decision and early action a little? Because I know I see that a lot in the chat here, and I know that's in a lot of people's minds. Do you anticipate either at your institutions or for what you're hearing from peers, whether colleges are going to be leaning heavier on early decision, taking larger percentage of their class early decision? Are they going to be changing deadlines for early decision to push them back to give students more opportunity to search? Any thoughts on that? Erica, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I think some of this is going to be really specific to the institution, right? And what percentages have they seen in these pools in previous years? Or how does this fit into other strategies that they may be putting into place as it relates to their pools and their goals for their incoming class? I mean, we've already seen some institutions push deadlines back, others are kind of holding tight. I don't know that we're going to see one policy or even just one gigantic trend across all of higher education. I mean, I think some of it may also be regional, right? In the West, we're now facing a whole other series of challenges this fall. And institutions will need to be reacting to what's happening in their communities now, right? And what's happening with students this fall. And so I think this is going to be a dynamic process. I encourage students to really be paying attention to the schools that are on their list and what's happening at those institutions, because it will be a response not only to this spring, but in some cases, an ongoing response to what's happening in our communities this fall.
That's a great point. AJ, any thoughts on early?
Yeah, I would just encourage students to, regardless of what's going on now, approach the early decision thought process as you would have if we were living in a normal world. The early decision is designed to really be an opportunity for the student, not just the school, but for the student to make a conscious decision about where they want to be. And so the last thing that you want is to add undue pressure to that process that makes you make a decision that you could ultimately regret later. I love the response that Erica gave. Schools are going to be making decisions based on unique experiences that the school will have to consider. But again, that should not impact your process that you walk through in order to create your list and to get those applications out in the time that you think that they need to be submitted. So chill out, go through the process as you would have, and make right decisions about that.
Great point. Yeah, rather than think about how to game the process, a more intentional approach. Anything to add, John?
I just want to say we have decided to move our deadline 2 weeks later out, so moved it from what would have been November 2nd on a Monday to November 16th. mostly because so many schools across the country are not open, or getting a very late start. In many cases, people haven't seen each other first 6 months, not counting maybe some Zoom calls. So that's not a simple decision, because it puts a heavier burden on the reading staff and then on financial aid staff to get the answers. So I would say that we're trying to do that, to be as helpful as we possibly can. But there's another sort of narrative and question that's going on this summer since George Floyd was killed, about questions of equity and access and opportunity. And I think we're taking a fresh look again at early decision and its effects and its impacts on the diversity of the community that we want, and the ability to reach out to students at all socioeconomic levels. So I think there'll be some pushing and pulling factors, all of stemming out of this very odd year, not all in one direction.
I am totally in agreement with that. I have not hidden my feelings about early decision as not always equitable or student-friendly policy. So I'm actually writing a piece for Forbes about it right now, about early decision as the pumpkin spice of college admission. So stay tuned. What about, there's some questions here about GPAs, and I'd love to just kind of, especially because schools that are going test optional, it's always been this way, but grades and curriculum are going to be most important. And I think there's some concern from folks, both because their schools went pass-fail last spring. They're looking at cumulative GPAs, and GPAs from different schools are on different scales, and that's always been an issue. Some schools, like Derryfield, we don't have a GPA that we compute, and I know a lot of schools, a lot of colleges and universities recompute GPA anyway. So I'd just love to hear about kind of, maybe you could share with people as applications come in from schools all over the country with all these different scales, how are you making sense of that, and how are you kind of processing that? AJ, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Like a number of other schools, we have our sort of internal metrics that we use in order to kind of flatten out the GPA and make the most equitable decision possible using that. We do recognize that there are indeed all kinds of scales that are out there, and as you pointed out about Derryfield, there are some schools who aren't using GPAs, but for us, we have to get a GPA plugged in there that we can use to do some measure of comparison for that. But I also want to point out that Jonathan mentioned earlier about the 300 or so admissions deans who were a part of Making Caring Common. I too am a signer of that, and really what that is about is saying to students and families that we are committed to looking at really the holistic view more than ever when it comes to making our decisions, our admissions decisions. And so while the GPA becomes a part of that process, will always be a part of that process, it is obviously not the sole component. And I think that this year more than ever, we are going to be doing our best to try to look at these other factors to assess what I said earlier, and that is a student's ability to really fit and ultimately graduate from Howard. And I would expect that's going to be the same for most of the colleagues as well. So GPA will matter, but more than ever, I think again there are going to be other factors that are going to come into play.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts, Erica, John, Erica?
Yeah, I'd add that part of our responsibility as colleges and as admissions offices is to make sure that our readers, whether our teams are, small in response to the size of our pool or, large groups of readers who would come in to help with this experience, that they are trained to understand the context that these applications are coming from. So I always say the first question we ask is, when looking at a transcript, what school is this transcript from? What opportunities are available to students within that space? What have been the limitations based on the school the student has attended? And then how have they done given those opportunities and those limitations? And that's our job as readers, right? It's our job as admissions offices to make sure our readers are trained to have that kind of contextual lens when they're looking at transcripts. So no two schools are the same, right? No two schools in the same city are the same. Whether it's reading by geography or some other characteristic, it gives us the chance to dig in, right, and know as readers, where's the student from? What's been available to them? How have they done within that space? And not against one metric where we'd assume all students have had the same experiences.
That's great, thanks. John?
I'd say a couple things. We haven't been, for some time long prior to my arrival at Cornell, we haven't been calculating GPAs or pulling GPAs off in a way that is material to the decisions. It's always been a deep review, but that deep review has been concentrated within each of the colleges and academic programs. They've been looking at the transcript to understand what's going on with that student. We've added another layer, so we're trying to do a little cross-hatching to get a better, more full understanding of the academic performance of the students. So we'll now do a school-based review, which is, I think, common probably at Westminster. It was common at USC and Rochester, where one expert, in our case in the undergraduate admissions office, will develop a better expertise in all the applicants from that school and start to learn the context and the differentiation that way, because I think that's what matters most. It's never been GPA as this pure objective metric that exists out in space any more than test scores are a pure objective metric that exists out in space. Really what we're trying to understand is, what were people presented with, what did they then take advantage of and do? And I think we're gonna get a fuller and better understanding of each student by assigning some values to that kind of a read. But you have touched on something that I'm worried about, which is the spring semester hit all of us in North America in March. We all went to different kinds of things at colleges and at high schools to flatten out and add pass-fail options and sort of take the stress away, in part to be able to do that. I have heard occasionally from some high school counselors of my acquaintance that there's some concerns and questions about that too, as they move on to another semester of either entirely at home. But that worries me, because we're not, I'm a believer in the Mastery Transcript Consortium and all the things that are going on to innovate in this space, but I don't think we're ready. We're not ready to differentiate well among 50,000 applications with 2 semesters in a row of really not having grades or not having grades that differentiate enough. So that's a slight nagging concern for me, and something that I think we'll be talking about and addressing through all of November, December, January, and hoping that we can get some really substantive information that helps us understand how students are doing.
For schools that were both last spring and now again this fall.
That would be my fear, is that at some high schools, they might go on and do this yet again. And at a Derryfield or a place that does this all the time, we have all our ways of pulling information out of the reviews that are done, but you can't substitute something or nothing for something. So if people have been assigning grades and now move not to having elaborate commentary, which the vast majority of schools can't afford to do it, the teachers just don't have the time and the bandwidth. So I hope grades come back at least enough to help us really be thoughtful and make good choices.
That's a great point. So next, I would love to dive in a little to, there have been a couple kind of a theme of questions in the chat here about extracurricular activities, and a couple different aspects. One that they've been less available, and last spring and this fall and this summer, things people had planned. And again, that the statement from Making Caring Common really addresses a lot of that, saying that admission deans get it, and they know that students all over the country weren't able to do spring sports and weren't able to participate in things this spring. But for students who were planning on having some opportunity, is there another way for them to communicate their intention to do that? Does that even matter? Is there a way for students to demonstrate beyond just kind of what they had done at the beginning of junior year and before, ways they've been involved. And then, so this is a multi-part question. You can take on whatever part of it you want, but then there's also this question of kind of leadership and how important is quote unquote leadership in a college application. There you go. So who wants to have at that? You can take any of those questions and run with it. Anybody want to start?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with what happened to the things I wanted to be doing, the way I wanted to spend my spring, or maybe even the ways I had planned to spend my summer. I've been asked this question in other spaces of, should I say what my plans would have been in this process? I guess my point is, if there was a plan that somehow fits into the bigger story, right? I have this commitment to something I feel really strongly about, and this summer was going to be an opportunity for me to explore it more deeply, or to sort of be more thoughtful about this interest that I have. I think those stories can be woven together in terms of what a student really values or something that's important to them. And what I don't see as being particularly helpful in the process is a laundry list of cancellations, right? Of things that, I would have done this, but I could have done this, but. I see it more as being, hey, if there was that thing that was really the next step for you in exploring what you feel deeply about, something you value, something you had been planning for, there may be a way to weave that into the rest of the application and use that as an example of this thing that you feel strongly about, or an experience you've really been preparing for. But I wouldn't spend a lot of time focusing on the things that you haven't been able to do. Right. I think the point that's been said a few times, there have been cancellations across everything from academics to athletics to extracurriculars to religious opportunities to students' jobs, right? Those have all been impacted, and we recognize that in the process.
Great. Jonathan, were you going to say something?
Well, I think it's going to be okay. I think early on, the losing the opportunity to achieve at the level that so many students desire to do and to show what they can do seemed like a tremendous loss. I think there was a moment where people realized, hey, this is how we are going to get through this. We're going to not consider those things the most important, and we're going to consider other kinds of things that we can do, the depth of thought we can bring to an issue, the questions we can ask, the introspection that we can bring to it. I don't think it all shifts to intentions of things that we wanted to do and couldn't, or things that we still plan to do once we're allowed to. It sort of shifts to other kinds of activities, other approaches, other ways that we've sort of mastered ourselves and learned something that enables us to do. I think a big feature of that I'm looking forward to, well, two big features. One is a lot of us have been put in circumstances where we have to care for others in ways that we didn't find predictable or find that there was time in our schedule to do. I've seen a lot of that spirit of volunteerism and just extending self-care out to those who you might not even you consider most close to you most of the time, but you invest in neighbors and colleagues and people far and near. The other one that I'm certainly hoping to see is the world's messed up. There's just so many problems. Pick one. The climate's burning up. Literally, my home state of California is on fire. There's been hurricane. The politics are messed up. The choices are gone. The pandemic itself is, of course, a disaster in every way. If you and as I talked about before, racial issues that have risen to the fore in a new way among a collection of people that hadn't really thought that way before. Man, if you haven't found a cause to celebrate and champion and work on and advocate for in whatever way you can, whether it's writing letters or just forwarding your posts on social media, but making it meaningful and making it work, then I think something's wrong. If you're sort of part of the human family right now, I think there's something you can be doing along those lines that is helpful and useful. So I hope to see a lot more of that.
It's really well said. Kind of along those lines, and then AJ, I'd love to get to you. Along those lines, are there because there's in many ways such polarization in our society and our culture and on a lot of these issues, are there things that students should avoid, like in an essay? And I mean, I get that question a lot. You know, are there issues that I just shouldn't touch and I shouldn't address in a personal statement, because you know I don't know who's going to be reading my essay, and I might feel strongly about this, but you know, I don't know how it's going to come off. Any thoughts on that, Jonathan? John, I mean, just based on some of the stuff.
I'm sorry. I thought you threw that to AJ.
I was going to say, I want to hear his response to the activity stuff. I just was kind of following up on what you were saying.
Oh, I don't think so. Honestly, I'm way off on left field in this, so please, none of you pay any attention to anything I'm saying. But I honestly think that if there's something you care about, you're passionate about, whether that's political or religious or any other darn thing that really is important to you, it isn't helping you to sort of hide that light under a bushel, as they say, or to sort of try to divert attention from something that's important to you. And so I think being authentic and being real, even if you're writing about something that you think might trigger somebody, is a better way to go, or at least more often than it's given to. And the other thing is, on the other side, just as an admission professional, I'm a little offended by the idea that I'm going to have this hair trigger response, that a misplaced word or an idea I don't agree with is going to divert all of my attention and make it impossible for me to decide to recommend and advocate for a student. I think universities have to be more than that. We have to encompass multitudes and lots of perspectives and ideas. Otherwise, I don't know why we exist. And I don't think admissions counselors are entirely divorced from that small c Catholic approach to trying to build a class that includes people with many different voices and views.
Well, and I think it's really important for folks to know how much training goes into training admissions reviewers and readers, and anti-bias training, and kind of norming of reading and all that kind of stuff. So I just think that's important to acknowledge. All right, AJ, what do you think about that massive extracurricular question?
Yeah, it's a great one. Can I just step in just a little bit on what was just said, because I think Jonathan brought up such a great point. I just only wanted to add the point that, you know, higher education in its purest form should be done in a way that truly honors diversity of opinions. When college campuses are at their best, we should be inviting people who have opposite views to the table. And it's through that we gain a greater sense of learning. And so admissions professionals who are trained well, to your point, tend to look for that diversity of thought to bring into their campuses. So I couldn't agree with my colleagues any more than what they said. I wanted to kind of focus a little bit on the leadership aspect of the question that you posed, because and I'm looking at this particularly through the lens of us here at Howard. We are really steeped in the value of leadership on our campus. And it's been such a part of our ethos for such a long time, such a high value for us, that we've tended to attract people who have that as a personal value themselves. And so what happens is it gets into now a question of fit, because if a student is admitted to the institution who has a low value for leadership, and the ability to show that leadership or demonstrate that leadership, that student tends to struggle in an environment like the one we have here, because the majority of students with whom they'll be around will be those who will be moving in that direction, and likely moving in that direction in a fairly at a fairly high tempo. So when we look at an application, that's one of the things that we're trying to evaluate is, you know, does this student fit the kind of value system that is common here at Howard, so that student can come into an environment where they can flow, if you will, in the manner that they can ultimately be successful. Now, I don't want to sound contradictory to what I just said earlier. So it's not that a student who, you know, doesn't necessarily demonstrate that could not do well here at Howard. I think they could, but I'm really trying to get to the issue of fit, because I think a student has to be very honest with with himself or herself about the culture and the nature of that institution at where they're applying, and take some time to truly examine, is that value system of that institution aligned with me? And that piece will play out in huge dividends if you come in close to figuring that out. It'll play out in huge dividends throughout your academic career. So getting back to the question of leadership, I think that obviously colleges are always looking for people who are standouts as a component of the class. But again, that could be diverse. But again, as it relates uniquely to Howard, that is something of very high value for us here.
And just to build off that, any thoughts on, I mean, you've been at 3 different institutions, and any thoughts on how students can really get a sense for those values? I mean, obviously looking at the mission statement and looking at what the school's putting out, but any way to tap into kind of getting a real good snapshot of what matters to a school, or what's important to the value system?
Yeah, absolutely. So getting that sense today, I think, is far better than what it was when I was looking to go to college, just because of the information highway, because of the internet, because of all of the examples that are out there that people within the institution are stating about themselves, about the school, whether it's through tweets, or whether it's social media, whether it's through YouTube. You kind of start to get a feel for the type of individual who really enjoys the experience, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that person, that image of that individual who tends to really say that this is the place for me. Now that takes some time. That you can't always get that in one, from one YouTube video. I mean, we try to do the best we can in putting out these great YouTubes, but we don't always get it right in terms of giving you the true sense. So I think that there's more information out there now based on the web and so forth. And then also, I think that when you look at, to your point earlier, mission statement, I think when you look at even the type of research that comes out of the institution, what they choose to focus on, perhaps, maybe some of its social science research might be descriptive to you. Maybe looking at some of the faculty background in the departments for which you're interested, that could help as well. So there are a number of different factors that I think one can consider when trying to figure that out. But I have always coached students to make that a key part of your college decision process. You've got the application aspect of it, but you also want to spend time really studying the nature and character of the institutions where you want to apply.
That's a great point. And I think also kind of diving deep into, how they're responding to things like COVID, and how they're responding to some of the political and some of the racial and some of the just climate issues and everything. How is the school responding? How is the community responding? How are the students responding, to get a sense of those values? Erica or John, anything to add to that about getting a feel for a school?
No, I mean, I think there's, we've all spent a lot of time sort of preaching the value of the campus visit, right? And we've been out there saying this for a long time and encouraging students when they can to connect with us. And now we're having to rethink that, right? And figure out new opportunities. And so while campuses may or may not even be able to open to visitors this fall, there are still a lot of ways to make a personal connection, right? We're still reaching out through high schools. We're holding virtual information sessions. We're thinking about ways to connect students with faculty in other ways that, aren't happening during an open house or during a campus visit. And so I think this has really put us on our toes and made us think about our own our own ways that we reach out to students. How accessible are we to students who can't visit campus? How are we out in the community doing work in different ways so that students have a lot of different channels for connecting with colleges? In some ways, I think we're doing that work better now than I've seen in my more than 2 decades in college admissions, right? It forced us to rethink models that many of us have just relied on for a long time. So I recognize that not being able to come and try the food or sit in on a class or take a tour makes it hard to get that day in the life. But in some ways, I think there are more opportunities out there right now than we've given students in the past. And I would encourage students to kind of dig into that and take advantage of some of those.
That's a great point. And like AJ was saying, there's a lot of information out there. It's just sometimes it's about kind of weeding through the noise to get to what really matters. So we are getting towards the 8 o'clock hour. So we're going to do the lightning round here to end up. And this is a question we've been ending all of these with. And so love to hear from each of you, and we'll start with AJ and then go Jonathan and Erica. What, if you were to do this over again, what would you tell your younger self about the college admission experience?
Start earlier. I was a compulsive young person at that time. Unfortunately for me, being a first-generation college student, I didn't have a great deal of guidance on what to do. And I just wanted to get the process over with as quickly as I could. Thankfully, I was a bright student, so it gave me options that sort of came to me. But if I had to do it over again, I would tell myself to slow down, spend more time doing the kinds of things that I just talked about earlier, finding the school that at which you think you really would be successful, and looking at multiple factors around that institution than just a rush to judgment. So patience, young man, is what I would say. Patience.
Patience and pre-planning.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. John?
Honestly, for me, the college search process, I recall, while it was definitely intimidating, and I was also first generation, really didn't have anybody around that knew a lot about what I needed to do. And I recall December of my senior year in high school feeling like just the worst time in my life, in adolescent frenzy, as all the applications would do and all that kind of stuff. But also, it was a lot of fun. And I think we tend to lose the fun. Yes, it's an important decision. It's a consequential decision. It's people do sometimes go the wrong way, and you want to be thoughtful about trying not to do that and avoid the pratfalls that are there. But by and large, most people find something that they like, that they enjoy, whether they sort of invest a lot or a little, whether they go slow or they go fast, whether they take advantage of all the information they do not. And I hope you give yourself some moments to just look ahead and enjoy this and think about everything you've done to that point to make it possible to do everything that comes next, and sort of embrace the joy of what that is and not make this a painful, horrible process. That's would be my strong recommendation.
Not have to be. That's a great point. Thank you. Erica?
Yeah, I would tell my younger self, one, to be confident in sort of embracing the unexpected, right? So for some students, that may be a school on their list that they came across while searching that they haven't thought about before, right? Be confident in what led you in that process to that institution. Or it may be, in the end, having to make decisions, feeling like you didn't get all of the experiences you wanted and figuring out which college was the right choice. That may mean selecting a school that you haven't had the opportunity to visit, or to travel a little farther away from home than your friends, or a little closer to home than your friends. And I'd say be confident in the process that led you to those opportunities. Right? Don't be so strong in what you thought it was going to look like in the end that you miss out on the unexpected things that come your way. Because I think sometimes we set out with a plan and it's really hard to deviate from the plan. And so be confident. There's a reason those options show up. There's a reason that school comes on your list, or a plan is presented that you hadn't thought of before. Don't ignore that, right? Think of this as the long game and not just the predetermined list at the beginning.
That's great. Well, there you have it. Be patient, be confident, embrace the unexpected, and be joyful. What a great way to kick off the fall. And I thank you all so much for joining us and for sharing your wise words. John, did you want to?
Well, there's so many great questions that have appeared in the chat. Are we going to see this transcript and have a chance to kind of go through them? I haven't felt like I could stop and answer most of them, but there's a lot of good things in there that I want to think about.
I'll throw your email in the chat and people can.
Send me a copy. Perfect. Okay. Thanks.
No, I will. I'll capture some of these and send them along. So thank you all, and thanks to Grown and Flown, and thank you for those who attended. And I wish you a joyful fall, and stay well and be well. And we'll be back in 2 weeks for another Thursday Night Live. We're doing it every 2 weeks this fall. And we'll send out the information with those panelists then. So good luck. Thanks so much. Have a good night.